Hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again with another YouTube video, and this is part of a new segment I'm going to start doing, which is called Little Known Comics You Should Try, in which I talk about comics that aren't very well known and don't seem to have really permeated the general comic reader consciousness very much, seem to have been forgotten or overlooked, and I talk about why I like them and why I think people should read them more and make up their own minds on them. So with no further ado, we are going to start off with Batman Hush. This is not the comic that I'm going to be recommending because this isn't what I would call a little known comic. This is in fact a mega blockbuster comic. Batman Hush was written by Jeff Loeb, drawn by Jim Lee, published by DC back in 2000, I want to say 2003, give or take. It was actually a 12-issue arc, and as such, keep in mind this isn't a graphic novel or a dedicated maxi series. This was 12 issues, I believe it was 608 to 619 of the ongoing Batman series at the time, which means it's an explicit story arc within an ongoing series. I'm just going to do a quick flick through here. You can see you have got some stunning Jim Lee art. Absolutely staggering. The Absolute Edition is amazing. The storyline is great. And it is very, very, very well regarded. It's also spawned its own animated spin-off and has been extremely influential in the Bat mythos ever since. I believe a Hush omnibus has been solicited or may even have come out, though it was cancelled loads of times, the solicitations by DC, so I'm not 100% certain, I haven't kept up with that. The Absolute Edition came out in 2005, and there was a Hush Unwrapped edition, which is purely the pencil sketches, and the entire comic done in pencil art only by Jim Lee, and that came out in 2011. Hush is exceptional, it's extremely popular, it's extremely well known, and it had a huge impact on the Bat mythos. It was set after the Brubaker run of Batman Murderer Fugitive, which was a huge line-wide crossover. I think it was 37 issues, give or take. And it is set just before the Azzarello run Broken City, which is a 6-issue story arc. So, highly recommended, but extremely well known. I mean, this is not a little known comic at all. So why am I mentioning this? Well, it's important to note that after the blockbuster success of Hush, DC wanted to follow it up with something similar. And so Hush is the first, I guess, the first sibling in a pair of twins, I would consider it. And the other comic, and this is our little known comic, is this one here, which is Superman for Tomorrow. Also drawn by Jim Lee. Rather than being written by Jeff Loeb, this was actually written by Brian Azzarello. And this is really considered kind of I guess it was a companion piece from a publishing perspective. They published Hush, huge success. So a year later, they wanted to do the similar thing with Superman. And they again got Jim Lee back to do that. And it's Superman for Tomorrow that I really want to talk about here, as a little known comic that I would recommend that you try. So a little bit of information on this. As I said, it was written by Brian Azzarello, drawn by Jim Lee. Again, 12-issue series. Again, it's an explicit arc in an ongoing series. This was Superman issues 204 to 215. And this Absolute Edition came out in 2009. Okay. I'll be completely honest with you, I haven't read this recently. I haven't read Batman Hush recently either. I haven't read that in, God, maybe 10 years or something. And similarly, I haven't read this in at least maybe 5 years, maybe even 10 years. So this is a rare video where, whilst I have read the comic, I haven't read it recently, so I haven't got much to hugely add in terms of information. What I want to do is give you a bit of an idea what the comic is about, and then just give you a feel of why I would recommend that you try it. So we have our usual dust jacket, our front flaps and so on, and then we get into it. What is the storyline about? The storyline is actually really unusual. From what I recall, it starts in media res. In other words, it starts in the middle of the story, and it starts at a point where 1 million people in Metropolis have disappeared. In fact, 1 million people, including Lois Lane, disappeared 12 months prior to the start of the story. Keep in mind, that isn't in the Superman issues, so you literally just read this and suddenly that event has happened. So, in a lot of ways, this really should have been a maxi series rather than an explicit arc of an ongoing series, but that's a question for another time. The storyline is basically about how Superman deals with this. It's also got a lot of issues about him kind of talking to people and dealing with his place in the world. It's got some great action. You can see here the artwork is absolutely phenomenal. This bad guy is a guy called Equus, who is awesome as an antagonist. We don't unfortunately see very much of him, but imagine I guess, a bit like Wolverine, a bit like Predator X. He's just amazing. The artwork is fantastic. Jim Lee artwork throughout. So why isn't this as well known as Hush, the comic which inspired the publishers to do this? To be honest, it's probably because Superman isn't as popular as Batman from a commercial perspective. I don't want to get into any arguments about that. I think that's pretty self-evident. I'm not as big a Batman fan as many people are, and as most DC fans are, I suppose. And so I'm a little bit more open to the idea of liking or preferring Superman comics. This storyline isn't great, I will admit that myself. From what I recall of it, I'm like, yeah, it was good, but it wasn't great. The artwork is absolutely staggering, though. And it was good enough and popular enough that it did spawn the Absolute Edition that we can see here. It's just an absolutely phenomenal experience in terms of just the artwork alone. And the storyline isn't bad, it's just not as sort of earth-shattering and impressive as Hush was. Hush was a really impressive storyline, and I say that as someone who's not really a Batman fan. Hush was damn good comics. This is just very okay comics. Like I say, I haven't reread it before doing this video. Normally I would do before doing a video talking about it, but I'm actually currently doing a Superman read-through where I'm rereading... Look at this artwork. How amazing is that? I'm currently rereading all the Superman single issues from 1991 up to 2011 as part of my Road to My DC Rebirth map. So as a result, I'm going to be reading this relatively soon, in a couple of months. And I didn't want to read it out of context because I basically just couldn't be bothered with that. But what I do recall from having read it is that this was fun, this was interesting, it wasn't brilliant. At the time I remember finishing it going, oh, that was okay, absolutely solid. I will point out, I have purchased it. I purchased it in Absolute Edition, which is the biggest, best version you can get. And that's partly because the storyline wasn't bad, but also because the artwork is exceptional. And to be honest, I look forward to reading it again now that I'm an older, much more mature reader with much more knowledge of DC and things like that. So hopefully I'll enjoy it much, much more. What I would say to you, as someone who I imagine probably hasn't heard of this or doesn't realise quite where this fits in publishing terms, this is definitely worth checking out. Superman for Tomorrow is a big deal, and it was intended as a big deal. After Batman Hush came out and was a huge bombshell in the comics industry, massive bestseller, Superman for Tomorrow was the partner title. It was the partner thing that was released for this. And I'm going to release a video soon about All-Star Comics where we'll talk about, again, the Superman-Batman partnership from a publishing perspective. If you like Batman Hush, you owe it to yourself to check out Superman for Tomorrow. You probably won't enjoy it as much, and I'll be honest with that. From what I recall, the storyline isn't as good, but the artwork is exceptional. I mean, this Jim Lee artwork is absolutely brilliant, bar none. I would recommend checking it out. I would recommend making up your own mind. I'm looking forward to rereading it myself and remembering what I liked and didn't like about it. Yeah, what I find interesting that people just tend not to realise that this was meant to be a big deal of the same level as Hush. That's what it was intended, that was the scope, that was the pitch for it. People just tend to view For Tomorrow as just like, oh, just yet another Superman story, not a big deal, etc., if they remember it at all. And in that sense, I think it's criminally sort of forgotten or overlooked as a DC story. And that's because a lot of time I think it's overshadowed by Hush, the precursor that really kind of set it up and kicked it off. Yeah, so there we are. This is a little known comic, or an often overlooked comic, that I think you should try. You may not love it. I personally don't love it. I do like it very much, but a large part of that is because of the artwork, and I'm a huge artwork fan, a huge fan of Jim Lee and so on. However, even if you end up not liking the story, even if you're not a fan of Jim Lee's artwork, you definitely owe it to yourself to try this, just because it forms an interesting note in comic publishing history. This is a comic that was not only planned to be the Superman equivalent of Hush, but was actually sort of the partner title to Hush in that sense. It was a Jim Lee partnered vehicle, and as I say, whilst Hush was written by Jeff Loeb, this was written by Brian Azzarello, and I would really recommend just checking it out for yourself. There's lots of different ways you can read it. As I say, it was collected in Absolute Edition in 2009, I think. There is no unwrapped edition for this of Jim Lee's artwork, even though there is one for Hush, which I think is weird, because unwrapped editions are all about the artwork. So if you're going to have one for Hush, you should have one for this. It's all Jim Lee. But nonetheless, there we are. Oddly enough, Hush is still available. You can still go on Amazon. You can buy Hush Absolute Edition, whereas the Superman for Tomorrow Absolute Edition is not available anymore, which is, I suppose, indicative of the fact it's not especially popular. Keep in mind, it's not unpopular. It's just not especially popular. Whilst Hush is available in a variety of things, deluxe editions, oversized editions, so on and so forth. So yeah, that's what I wanted to highlight, guys. I wanted to highlight the often forgotten sibling title to Batman Hush, which is Absolute Superman for Tomorrow. Amazing artwork, decent story. I'm looking forward to reading it again in a few months' time. And I would say that you owe it to yourself if you're a fan of amazing artwork, and if you're interested at all in large comic events, specifically for major characters like Superman, like Batman and stuff. If you read Batman Hush, you should really read what was aimed at being the next sort of Batman Hush story, which is Absolute Superman for Tomorrow. Yes, it's not as good as Hush, but the artwork is amazing. The storyline, as I recall, was interesting and not bad. And it's not a well-known comic, and it's, to be honest, kind of forgotten by the pages of history, which I think is a bit of a shame. So what I would say is, please check it out. You can get it from your library. You can buy the trade paperbacks. They've got slim size hardcovers and so on, and make up your own mind. I hope that was helpful, guys. I don't know how many people have heard about Superman for Tomorrow. I don't know how many of you were aware that Superman for Tomorrow was actually billed as kind of a equivalent landmark title to Hush when it was originally pitched and solicited. But I'd be interested to know your thoughts down below. Thanks for watching, guys.
All right, thanks for watching, everybody. As always, please like, comment, subscribe. As always, please follow me on Twitter at I am Thomas Judge, where I will post a daily review of whatever comics I've been reading. You can get an idea of what I'm up to on the channel. And as always, please support the channel by heading over to Amazon.com and checking out my prose novel about superheroes. It's a completely original piece of work. The first episode in it is called Arrivals, and the series as a whole is called No Gods or Kings. You can find an excerpt of that on my website, nogodsorkings.com. Until next time, everybody, stay classy.